of the most sought-after animals in North American field herping is the highly variable Rosie boa, one of two North American boa species found here in the United States. These snakes vary in color and pattern depending on where you find them. In the opening slideshow, you got a small sampling of some of the animals my guest Jerry Hartley has found and photographed on his widespread journey over the past 3 decades in search of the beautiful Rosie boa. On his website, localityrosies.com, he shares much of his adventures, and you can go there to find photographs of many of the different locality Rosie boas he has there documented. You're listening to the Edgar Ortega radio show. If this is your first time with me, welcome. Please open a tab and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and be sure to follow my Facebook page. Just search Edgar Ortega radio show, and go ahead and give that a follow. If you enjoy this video, as always, please share it and help get the word out about this young program. Many of you listening may be looking for tips on finding Rosie boas in the wild. Jerry gives us some good tips that may turn your luck around if you haven't had much luck with this species. I know it can be frustrating not having any luck when you have a target species and you want to get it photographed or you want to find one. But he gives us some good tips there. Others listening may be old hats at the Rosie boa game. I welcome you too. Jerry and I had a nice chat. It came out to about 40 minutes long, so he gives a good amount of info, and we learn a bit more about him and his experiences. I like hearing about people's backgrounds, and so we get to know him a little better. If you're listening and you're a reptile keeper but haven't gone out to discover reptiles in their natural environment, I encourage you to get out of the snake room and get out there. It's been raining like crazy out here in California, and spring is knocking on the door. So with all the rain, I expect this is going to be an absolutely amazing season for field herping, finding snakes out in the wild and other reptiles. If you do head out, please be sure to follow the appropriate laws in your state, do the research, and make sure you're doing everything the right way and not contributing to habitat destruction too. There are lots of things to keep in mind if you're starting out as a field herper, so make sure you have good herping etiquette. And that's something maybe we could do a show on that for you beginners. All right, with that in mind, you are about to hear me pick the brain of the man behind localityrosies.com. Rosies is spelled R-O-S-Y-S, localityrosies.com. So now let's go to that interview and listen to my talk with Jerry Hartley. Enjoy. All right, when you talk to people that you want to learn from, it helps if those people have a wealth of experience behind their belts. And when it comes to finding Rosie boas in the wild, Jerry Hartley has been doing it since 1988. If you're trying to do the math, that comes up to about 30 years of Rosie boa experience. He's here to squeeze as much of that knowledge as possible into our brains, or at least as much as we can handle in the time span of this show. Jerry Hartley, thank you for being here. Glad we could chat today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you came out to a Central Valley Herpetological Society meeting. I think you did a talk on something similar. That was fun.
Yeah, it was great. Good turnout and a lot of good questions. It was a good time. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, that was fun. I'm glad we can talk again here today. You're a big field herper. You've been doing it for a long time. Today, the topic is Rosie boas. Those are a lot of fun. I really like those animals. But give people listening an introduction to your experience in field herping and in keeping reptiles. Just a little background for everybody.
Okay. Well, as most herpers, it starts with childhood. I acquired my first snake at age 5 in 1967. Was a Pacific gopher snake, and that just kind of evolved into what's going on today. Through those years, through childhood and into my teens and then well into adulthood, I had a decent collection of animals, mostly stuff that I found, and would try to pair up to try to do the propagation thing just to see what I could do, and as most people do, just to try to reproduce the animals. But most importantly, really enjoy spending the time out in the field, not even just for just the snakes, but for everything else, floral and fauna stuff that's out there. I love it all. So a lot of time in the field just to be out, not necessarily to actually collect anything, but just to be out and about. Through the years, I've met numerous people, just like everybody else has, then gained a lot of knowledge through older folks, myself, through those years, and kind of took it to heart, and with that passion behind it, used that education from others to better myself in the field so I could do more observations and see more and be rewarded more. So it's been a lot of fun. My family is always involved, and of course a lot of really good friends such as yourself, are involved with this, and I just love the whole aspect of it because of what it's provided me through the years. So currently, I do have a collection of Rosie Boas. I also keep locality-specific California king snakes, as well as locality-specific bull snakes and gopher snakes. Everything that I have is very locality-specific. I'm not into morphs, unless, of course, it is a locality-specific morph. But that's pretty much what my collection is made up of now. And most of the animals that have a lot of sentimental value involved in them also. But what I currently do in the field now is based on just preservation of species and or, the habitat destruction that's out there is kind of what I like to spend time in and around just to see what the numbers are like and things like that. Just for my own personal observations, nothing more than that. So
yeah, no, it's great. You've been doing it for a long time. I mean, it's great to get out and find these animals out in the wild. A lot of people on the keeper side of it, they never get to experience that, but you learn a lot from finding these animals out in the wild. You learn a lot about what they might need in captivity as well.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've bred Rosie Boas, obviously. If so, for how long have you been doing that?
I've been breeding Rosies since 1991. Was the first litter I had produced was from Baja Animals. I had acquired a wild animal and then was able to pair it up with a captive-born first generation, or known as an F1 animal, and didn't really know what I was doing. So I could, at the time, solicited information from my mentor in life now, and one of the Rosie Boa gurus, Gary Kiesler, and was able to acquire the education needed behind, how to cool them, what to do in terms of the photo period, meaning keep them in the dark, and the usual brumation type skills that I knew nothing about at the time. So I was successful in doing so, and went there. And as I acquired other locality animals, did much the same, and it's actually pretty easy, with the technology that we have nowadays in terms of enclosures and keeping consistent heat and the different things that we need to do for them. But it's super rewarding for me too, and with that, in some of the breeding that I've done over the years, I started what was called a Rosie Reward Program, and that was to help children that were struggling in school and kind of that were up and coming herpers, and they were struggling with school, and I would donate, if you will, or gift, whatever the terminology is that you want to use, baby Rosie Boas to those kids that were showing improvement in their academics. So that was another inspiration thing for me to be able to provide them with that. So it kind of fuels that fire a little bit for me to keep breeding as well.
Yeah, that's real neat, and a neat program. Anytime you want to get kids involved with this hobby, whether in the keeping side of it or out in the field, it's worth doing. It's lots of fun working with kids. Let's talk about the animal itself now. Tell people that might be just learning about Rosie Boas. I mean, they've seen them at the shows or they see pictures of them, but they've never gone out looking for them. Tell me a little bit about the range of the Rosie Boa and a little bit about the significant variations we see in the different locales.
Okay. The northernmost part of their range, at least their known range, includes all the way up into Death Valley into the Panamint Mountains. Now, I've seen three of them in the wild in the Panamint Mountains in what's called Immigrant Canyon. It's the northernmost known part of the range. I'm not convinced that they aren't further north than that into the Grapevine Mountains and perhaps even further than that, based on how those mountains connect. And then to the east, They are known all the way over into the Aquarius Mountains, which is still northern also, but in the Aquarius Mountains east into Arizona. And then as far south as all the way to the tip of Baja. I have seen them all the way, so from the most northern part of their range all the way to the most southern part of their range in the field, that was kind of a bucket list thing, if you will, for me. And then in all places in between. As you know, there's different subspecies of them. There's still a lot of taxon debates out there. There's still a lot of the academics that are currently trying to rename them. There's a lot of debate about that going on out there. There's been mitochondrial DNA studies on those animals based on where they're located within their range to determine if there is, in fact, different subspecies. So none of that's really been challenged enough to change any of the taxon in those animals. So what I observe is a lot of the older literature, and what I stick to in my practices. So you've got the coastal type Rosie Boas, which is the subspecies is Rosia fusca, and then you got the desert animals from the desert part of California into Arizona, which is Gracia. The cool side note on that, Gracia was named through Clobber, Lawrence Clobber, in his studies for rattlesnakes. When he was doing his studies for rattlesnakes, he kind of had those guys named after his wife, which is his wife's name was Gracie. So kind of a neat side note that Gracia comes from that name. And then as you get into the Mexican range, you get to Trivigata, and then the mid-Baja animals are known as Myrialepis. Again, all those names are being challenged by different academics based on their studies, but that's what I hold to. That's the old terms, and that's what I stick to today. Probably just dating myself that way, but anyway. The neat thing is, that in those ranges, there's so many variables in terms of color and pattern. And as you saw in the talk that I did there at the Central Valley Herp Society, I had a lot of different examples of those animals. And that's one of I think the neatest things about Rosie Boas is the variability in color and pattern based on those subspecies. In terms of what people like, people will contact me and say, well, what do you suggest? And I tell them what they like the look of, because in terms of how they do in captivity, there really isn't much difference. Some of the animals are a little more tolerant of humidities within the enclosures, like the coastal animals, but that's not a real big deal with all the different subspecies. So what I would tell somebody that is just getting into Rosie Boas is to go for what you like the look of, and then kind of go from there. It just depends on how much of an aficionado you want to be with it. But there's such a huge range in color and pattern that it's kind of hard to choose. So you got to do your research. My website, localityrosies.com, has a lot of those examples and a lot of pictures on it. There's a locality tab on there that has a lot of the different pictures of all the different subspecies in their localities, and that kind of gives them an idea of what maybe they want to have.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I mean, generally in the pet trade, they get labeled pretty generically. I mean, most of the ones you see here, they'll get called either coastal or desert Rosie Boas. You'll see the coastal ones, they're a little darker a lot of times, right. And then the desert ones will be a little brighter with some more, a little more color in them. So generally, that's how they're labeled, either coastal or desert Rosie Boa. If it's not just Rosie Boa. So if people are really into Rosie Boas, I mean, they really get into the locales. So to kind of keep the bloodlines from the same area, so you get those those looks that you get in nature naturally, and people that breed want to preserve that.
I like to preserve the integrity of the look of the animal based on its geographic origin, and I think that's very, very important to me, and that's what I try to educate people on. Could you breed and cross all those different subspecies? You absolutely can, but it's in terms of true Rosie aficionados, mostly being local guys, that's very frowned upon. So that's what I try to educate folks on, is the integrity of the animal based on where it comes from. You look at an animal from the Anza Borrego Desert east of San Diego compared to, the Mexican Rosie Boa from any of its range, that's such a completely different looking animal. So You want to keep the integrity of that based on where it's from. That's why you see locality, the names of specific animals is literally based on where the animal has come from. Probably the most known Rosie Boa out there, of course, is from Whitewater Canyon, that's out in Riverside County by Palm Springs, and that's the most known. Well, that Whitewater, that is just the name of where the animal is from. It's not anything other than that. But that's important stuff, and I try my very best to educate folks to keep that integrity alive.
Yeah, no, that's great. And if you get really good at it, I mean, you can look at Rosie Boa and kind of tell where it's from. Usually people look at it, they think they're all the same, but you look at them, there's these slight variations in the heads and the pattern and stuff like that, even the scales and everything. So it's lots of fun to get to know the different locales. Let's talk a little bit on what's worked for you as far as finding Rosie Boas in the wild. Now, when you go searching for Rosie Boas, let's start with the when. When you go field herping, you can't just go any time of year to look for what you want. There's a when, what time of year to go, season rather. So what's the best time if somebody wanted to go out and find these animals, from your experience?
Well, the interesting part about that question is it's kind of a two-part answer. And the first part is knowing what kind of time you want to spend in the field. Now, if you're a true field collector that wants to be walking in the field and be in the habitat proper, obviously the early spring, to include right now, this time of year in February and into March in the Southern California locations down there, you can be in the field to literally observe them even out on the crawl, as well as under rocks or any other cover. So that's one type, and then the other type, of course, during the warmer months is they turn crepuscular or even nocturnal. So then it becomes going into their habitat and just driving the roads, as so many people like to do, and find them laying on the roads at night. So where I was going with that being two parts is, how do you like to spend your time in the field? I like to do both, but I actually really enjoy spending quality time with either family or friends in the car and listening to music and having some good on-the-road food and just driving the roads and finding them out that way. I also think of that as a rescue mission to move them off the road so that any other type of vehicle out there don't, run them over and kill them. In the field proper, when you're this time of year and during the daylight hours, is probably the most rewarding because you're in and about their habitat proper, and it's really neat to observe them even out on the crawl and just to watch them and see what they do and crawling through the rocks or even come upon a prey item. I have a very close friend from the late 80s, early 90s that observed a Rosie Boa catch and constrict and consume a rabbit in Riverside County and up by Lake Matthews. And so it depends on what you want to do. It's not hard to do depending on the timing. They are actually a very common snake within their known habitat. It just, again, depends on what you want to do. What I would tell people, if you're going to be in the field collecting, they're actually in their habitat, you've got to be very careful of venomous animals as well. They share the same habitat with a lot of different rattlesnakes too. So again, it depends on what you want to do and how you want to do it. There's so many variables out there. A lot of people ask, what is the perfect time? And I tell them the perfect time is any time that you can get in the field is a good time. So is there a science to it? Yes and no. So where their density is usually south-facing slopes that are covered with rock, but you can't just find them under just any rock. There's specific rock types that they like, that they can use to thermal regulate. And then again, during the summer months, they're just going to be out on the crawl, so you're going to see them out on the roads or on the shoulder of the roads because they're out during those nighttime hours, so they feel it's safe moving in the cloak of darkness, if you will. So it's totally two different kinds of things. So it just depends on what you want to do.
Yeah, so it sounds pretty typical of the herping season. Spring, and you go flipping, and then in the summer you go road cruising for them. What about moisture? Is that pretty typical? I mean, generally you find more snakes when there's more wet weather. I mean, this time of year we're getting tons of rain, so I'm expecting like tons of snakes under every rock right later on in the spring.
Yeah.
So is that what we're looking at this season?
You can. It does help them to be on the surface more because, as with any other herp, they have to maintain a specific level of hydration. So they will be on the surface more this time of year, and the moisture under the rocks or under any cover item is important. Once it does start to dry up, what that correlates with is warmer temperatures typically. So they usually are not found under surface cover items because the surface cover items get warmed up too much by the sun, becoming too hot. So they go down, they retreat down into rodent burrows or whatever underground corridors that they can get into because, again, it helps them maintain a specific hydration level, and then they can thermal regulate, get out of the heat. That's why during the summer months you find them out at night on the roads because, again, it cools down to a more of a conducive temperature for them without overheating, and their prey items are out also. What people fail to realize is most of their activity is based on thinking of food, just like any other wild animal. Their surface time at night, they're out looking for prey items. And then during this time of year, they're looking for prey items, but they do it more in the form of an ambush and wait for the meals to come to them. So you're absolutely right. Moisture does play a key part. And that's what changes their behaviors based on the seasons and that moisture level.
No, yeah, so that's really interesting. Talk to me about, you go different states. You'll find these guys in California, Arizona, and of course in Mexico. Of course there's laws. You mentioned collecting earlier, whether people want to go searching for them or just to take pictures, which would be something I'd be interested in. What are the different laws in the different states? Do they vary? I mean, in California, you have to have a valid California fishing license to even go looking for anything. What about elsewhere?
That's correct. Yeah, for California, it's a fishing license, and there's the bag limit of 2 per year on that fishing license each year. And in Arizona, it's actually a hunting license. But if you're a California resident, you would go to Arizona, and you have to get a out-of-state license, hunting license, to be able to collect in the States. Now, you can go and be in the field and look. I'm sorry, what?
Or even just to look for them.
Now, I say just to look for them, you don't have to have a license. Obviously, if you're not collecting, you can go photograph animals, in any state for that matter, as long as you're not collecting them.
Yeah. Of course, it doesn't hurt if you get stopped by the game warden or somebody just to have that there if they don't believe you. So it's a good idea. It's a good idea to have those licenses anyway.
It's good to be in good relation with them or any law enforcement because they have their job to do. They're there for a reason, and they have to try and govern that because there are, in fact, a lot of people that go out, collect those animals, and then try to sell them. It's not. That's obviously illegal because you can't sell wild animals.
No, you can't do that. No.
So there is it is very value added to have the right paperwork no matter where you're at for that stuff. So and it helps the I guess the economy, if you will, as well. Paying into that.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's important to follow all the laws and to look up all the hunting laws for any herps. On government websites, wherever it is, whatever you got to do. All right, we talked a little bit about when you find them. We talked about the moisture, what the weather's kind of got to be like. But let's talk a bit about the habitat. You mentioned a little bit about it. They're found in rocky areas, but tell me about the habitat you go searching for Rosie Boas.
Well, so in different, there's indigenous rock to different parts of the range. Most of what you find in California is typically a granite type rock, but there is a lot of rock in some of the eastern Mojave part, the eastern Mojave Desert, that is not necessarily a granite type rock. It is a very hard rock, and it will. What they mostly like is rock that flakes or breaks away from the bigger part of the outcropping. So it creates a cover item that isn't necessarily real thick, like a round rock, which they can get underneath, and that cover item is then warmed by the sun. So they use that to thermoregulate. So the rock type plays an effect that way. You don't usually find them in like a lava type rock, something that's thick that doesn't fracture and come apart and create what's called a talus slide, meaning the smaller particles of big outcroppings that form like a big pile of smaller rocks, because they use those to crawl in and out of, not only to find prey, to thermoregulate as well. So you can find them on the kind of on the slopes that are below where those rock outcroppings might be, because they will travel into those areas. Again, usually it's the males that are found traveling looking for females, but they're going to travel into those areas surrounding the rock outcroppings also to look for food items. The alluvial fans on some of the bigger mountain ranges offer a lot of subterranean type conduits to be able to travel, so they're not even necessarily on the surface. They can travel below the surface, not only to maintain the proper temperature, but again, that hydration level. So the rock is important, and they have bigger densities in terms of population within the rock, but I have found them a long way from the rock as well, out in the flats, where they're used in kind of the subterranean rodent burrows and things like that to be able to travel and to thermoregulate in. Down in southern Baja, when you get down into Baja Sur, there isn't any rocks around where they're at all, and even some of the agricultural type areas. So, but they're generally mostly associated with rocks, but it is a specific type of rock that will come apart that they can get underneath. Again, a lava type rocks, they're not usually found in that, just because it's not conducive to what their behaviors are.
Now, you mentioned flipping. Now, it's important to, you also mentioned habitat destruction. Can you talk a little bit about, basically etiquette out in the field when you go flipping you're flipping rocks to find these animals, or you're, lifting some type of rock. So talk a little bit about the etiquette and the problem with habitat destruction.
That's a great point. Again, with those granite-type rocks, as rocks come apart over the millennial, they create big cracks or fissures in the rocks, and those animals, Rosie Boas and other herps, use those cracks to thermoregulate. So they can be close to the surface, but not exposed to earth prey or something that might prey on them. But they'll use cracks. Unfortunately, guys will find them in those cracks or those fissures. They can visibly be seen, but they cannot be obtained because they've got themselves wedged in there. And some people will use crowbars. I've even seen evidence of like old bumper jacks or hydraulic jacks to pry those things apart to get those animals out. What they don't realize, or maybe they do realize and just care, is once those types of habitats damaged, those animals cannot use them anymore, or other animals that live in that same area cannot use those for what they're using for. And those things have been there for thousands of years, and the generation after generation of those specific animals has those things as part of their survival. And habitat destruction, it affects those animals along with all the other animals that are in that area, and they don't usually recoup from it because they do actually have a home range. There's a gentleman that's no longer with us, Brendan McGraw. He was a specialist in Rosie Boas, and he actually did radio telemetry studies on those animals, and they generally have a home area of about a square mile. He's found animals, the males, that would travel upwards of a square mile to look for females, but other than that, they don't go any further than that. So they're using a lot of those rocks specifically for their survival, to not only cut food items but to thermoregulate. And generation after generation uses those. So if there's any habitat destruction, it can decimate populations of all herps, for that matter.
Yeah, I know, and it's something simple as when you go herping for anything. If you're flipping, you put the rocks back how you found them. Of course, even if you leave it off a little bit, you don't get that seal that you had before. That and that all dries up if they liked a certain amount of moisture in it. Like if you're going looking for kings or something. So it's important to basically put the rocks back, the logs, whatever you're flipping. I know in California you're not allowed to break stuff apart to look for it. Break rocks, break logs, stuff like that. You mentioned I suggested having a California fishing license even if you're looking for them. In Arizona, you mentioned a hunting license being required. What about when you go down into Baja? A lot of people wonder, like, what are you doing? Because you're in Mexico, so is there any laws for even going looking for them there, besides being careful?
Well, yeah, besides being careful, no, there isn't any specific laws. And obviously you can't go down there and collect anything and then bring it back to the United States either. That's, obviously that's a violation of the Lacey Act. And if you don't know what that is, then, I suggest that you look it up. Yeah, it's definitely just observations down in once you went to cross state lines and gotten into Mexico. But Baja has a lot to offer for herps, and you can see a lot of Rosie Boas down there. And the temptation is obviously great to bring those animals back, but you're putting yourself at a lot of risk, and you're putting the animal at risk because people that try to smuggle or do those types of behaviors, they put the animal at risk by putting them somewhere where they could be exposed to high heat or whatever. It's just a bad thing. So if it's too tempting for you, probably the best practice is to not go down there at all. I've been down there several times, and I've seen a lot of animals and taken a lot of great photographs. And you get to archive those animals with the photograph, and they're kind of immortalized that way, and you can enjoy them and share them with your friends just as well. The good thing is a lot of zoological establishments have brought those animals back legally over the last 30 years. And, all those animals are available through the pet trade. There's people that keep them very locality specific as well, just to, again, keep the integrity of the animal. So those animals are available through the pet trade, and you can find them online. And there's a lot of reputable breeders out there. And the good thing to do is get on some of the online forums and ask those questions about those animals if that's something that you're interested in.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, Baja has some amazing-looking animals. I think my favorite ones are down in Baja or in Arizona. There's some great-looking variations in the locales. I think, what are they called, the Magdalena ones?
Magdalena's, yeah, which is the Trivigata. That's the true Mexican one. Some of the more popular animals that are out there that are more sought after are from a little town called El Rosario, which is on the Pacific side of the Baja Peninsula, up kind of in the mid part of the peninsula, and that's a very sought after animal based on it. Colors, they have a burgundy stripe on kind of a slate gray background, and just they have a very unique look to them, and that's a very popular animal. But yeah, the Magdalena Plains or all the way down to Cabo San Lucas, those Trivigatas down there, some of the more sought after ones, and again, even though those are Mexican animals, so many of them are so different from each other as well. So in terms of look, so again, I suggest getting online, looking at all the different photographs that are out there, and kind of, if people want specific animals, then they seek them out by name, and they'll be able to get those animals in the fall when the babies are born.
Yeah, let's little note on road cruising. Is there something you look for when you go out looking for Rosie Boas in the wild when you're road cruising at night? Is there anything specific, or where you look, or what are some just little nuances and tips you'd have out there?
Well, there's a lot of thought behind it and a lot of different opinions based on it. But ideally, you want to be in their ideal habitat, which is any rocky environment, and then drive those roads through the specific type of habitat that has all the rocks in it. And if there can be water that's nearby, that helps as well because it has a greater population density. But paved roads are great, but believe it or not, dirt roads are even more successful on, because a paved road is also a foreign thing to them, if you will. The scent of it is foreign, and a lot of Rosie Boas will not crawl out onto a paved road. I have found more Rosie Boas on the dirt shoulder of paved roads, and crawling with the road because they do not want to crawl out onto it. Now on dirt roads, it's the same dirt they were crawling on prior to getting to the road, so they know that there's no difference, and they will crawl right out onto the dirt road. I have also found Rosie Boas well off the dirt road by seeing a snake track going across the dirt road, stopping a vehicle and taking a flashlight, following that trail that went across the dirt road well off the road, and found the Rosie Boa laying where you would have never have seen it. So temperature is important. Obviously, it can be too warm. What people don't realize is Rosie Boas are a lot more cold tolerant than what people would think. I found more Rosie Boas in the upper 60s than I have any other temperature. So there's a lot of times people will give up if they're out in the later summer months because they haven't seen anything, and they'll go home or go back to the hotel or whatever.
So you come out later, maybe
by 11 o'clock, and sometimes those animals aren't even out till then. I found them literally all the way up till dawn, and crawling across the road. But a lot of them later at night because they do prefer a little bit cooler temperature.
No, that is really cool and interesting. Now, do you have any books you recommend for people interested in either finding Rosie Boas or about their natural history, or just looking at pictures of them? Are there any that you recommend for people?
There's one that's published out there. It's just called Rosie Boas. It's Randy Lindbergh is one of the Rosie Boa gurus, and Gerald Merker put together, and that is out there. That can be found on. What I would suggest is just to go onto Amazon. And you can just type in the search engine Rosie Boas, and you'll get the books that are out there. There isn't a lot of literature in terms of the actual field collecting part of it or how to see them in the field, but there are a lot of different websites and forums that are out there that provide that kind of information.
That book is really great. I got that a few years ago, and Gerald Merker's, I heard him speak as well. It's a really great book. It's got bunch of the different locales and great photography from those three guys. I think it was that put that book together, and it's got some information. I was curious. I want to ask you something. In that book, it mentions keeping Rosie Boas fairly dry, and I think it mentioned in captivity giving them water, like say for a day or two, and then taking it out. Do you keep the water in? Do you take it out when you have them in captivity? Do you do it differently?
Well, it depends on the enclosure. Also, again, you can actually get too high of a humidity content within their enclosure. They prefer to have a well-ventilated enclosure. So if you have a very well-ventilated enclosure, like with the screen top, you can keep water in there with them all the time. But if you're using more of a rack-type system, it's better just to provide them with water for a couple days and then remove it. Another very common practice is to remove the water when you're feeding them and not to provide them with water after they have eaten, because they will drink quite a bit of water after eating, and some animals are prone to regurgitation with doing that. So again, it depends on the enclosure. What I would recommend with a screen top type enclosure, it's okay to leave the water in there, but in a rack system, it's good to remove it.
Yeah, a lot of people think of keeping, you can keep a bunch in a rack, but it does hold humidity a lot better. So, the other way of keeping them in a well-ventilated tank or something like that might be the better option. No, that's really cool. I mean, there's lots of information out there. Other than that, their care is pretty basic. No, Jerry, I appreciate you talking here with me. Do you have? Is there a website you have, or where people can see photos of your adventures, or do you have a website?
Yeah, if you go onto localityrosies.com, just Google that, and it'll pop up, and then there's a lot of the husbandry information on there, and then there's a lot of, again, the photographs like you talked about, and there's some actual kind of adventure type stuff on there too. So it's meant to be educational to keep the integrity of the animal. It's to be fun. Also, I'm not an academic, so I don't, I try to keep it more fun and more user friendly for the people to keep their interest. It's not real scientific, but there is plenty of that information that's out there as well.
No, there's a great deal of knowledge you can gain from experience, and I think we got a little bit of that from you today. Jerry, it's great to talk with you again. Thank you for sharing some of your Rosie Boa knowledge with us. We should talk king snake sometime.
Yeah, that would be great. I would love to do that. And in terms of the field herp or the Herp Society down there, let me know if you need any guest speakers again. I'd be glad to come down again. I really enjoyed myself with doing that the one time. But I appreciate you giving me the time, and hopefully this was educational for the folks that are out there. And again, go onto the website and look at the forums that are out there. There's lots of good information out there. Just ask the questions.
Now, we're talking with some mountains between us, but I saw your signal was a little robotic at times, but I think we got it all. It sounded all right, so it'll pass, I think.
Good. I hope so. Well, thanks again for calling. I really had a good time, and I don't get to have that kind of stimulating conversation, so it was good, and I enjoyed it.
No, that was lots of fun. All right, Jerry, thanks again.
All right. Thanks, Edgar, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Once again, that was Jerry Hartley of LocalityRosies.com. Be sure to check out that website and see all the different photographs he's taken over the years of Rosie Boas from all the different localities he's been to. You've been listening to the Edgar Ortega Radio Show. Please be sure to subscribe on YouTube, find us on Facebook, like and follow, and please share this program if you enjoyed it, and tell others about it. Hopefully we'll get a lot more people listening. We'll do lots of animal, wildlife topics, reptiles, amphibians, and other stuff. And thanks again for listening. This has been the Edgar Ortega Radio Show.